Welcome back for folks who are just joining us to the 1 in 3 Speakout hosted by Advocates for Youth. My name is Sarah Aldalo, and I am the Policy Director at Generation Progress, and I am privileged to be one of the hosts for this historic event. We are beginning the third hour of the first ever online abortion Speakout. Throughout the day, we'll hear from over 100 people talking about their experiences with abortion care. Thank you for joining us today, and thanks to the many people who are joining us with their personal stories. As many of you know, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime here in the United States. Despite the fact that abortion is very common, we rarely talk openly about our decisions to end a pregnancy. For too long, conversations around abortion have been dominated by politicians and anti-choice activists who use shame and stigma as a tool to silence people and to advance awful legislation that limits access to abortion services. Today, we are working to build a new conversation, one that is grounded in the lived experiences of real people, one that works towards building community rather than isolation, compassion rather than shame. We are shattering the silence. We honor the long tradition of speakouts that started on the eve of the historic Roe v. Wade decision. We also honor the long tradition of storytelling and social justice movements across cultures, the tradition of placing people and their lived experiences at the center of the conversation. Today, Advocates for Youth is grateful for the opportunity to host and bring together people from around the country to break through the stigma and shame that people are made to feel around abortion, and to highlight real people's experiences and stories around abortion care. In the last hour of the Speakout, we heard from comedian and Daily Show co-founder Ilyse Waldman, who uses her story both to make people laugh and to protect women's rights. From Jenny, who wrote about what happened the week before her abortion. From Heather, who was inspired to create pieces of art dedicated to honoring the role abortion and contraception plays in women's lives. And we heard from many others. All of us have a role in shattering the stigma and ensuring that women have access to safe and legal abortion care. So today, if you have a personal story and would like to share it with us, visit www.onein3campaign.org to share your written or video story. Now, I'm joined in this hour by Graciela, a 1 in 3 student activist with one of my favorite organizations, Color, the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here. It's so important for me to be here. It still shocks me every day that we're still fighting this fight to convince people that women are people. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks for flying all the way out here from Colorado. We'd like to encourage everyone who's watching to go to our website and sign our pledge to end the stigma and shame around abortion. You can sign right online at www.onein3campaign.org. Graciela, will you introduce us to our first guest this hour?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Our first guest is Heather, who is joining us by Skype. Heather, please start when you're ready.
Hi, thank you. My name is Heather McGibbon, and I had a medically induced abortion about a year and a half ago. This is one of the only times I've talked about it, and it's kind of ironic because I've worked as a clinic counselor at ParkMed Physicians for about 16 years. And while I've talked to hundreds of thousands of women about their abortion decisions to help them get access to funds and social services, insurance, and other types of support, I don't talk about this personally. And I was very surprised by that. Anyway, my story is kind of different than a lot of other people's in that I was really lucky. I found out I was pregnant right away and went to see my doctor. And while I hadn't expected to get pregnant at that particular time, I'd been with my husband for 12 years at the time, and while I was pretty sure he was going to be shocked, I figured it would probably be a good thing. It would probably be okay. So while I was trying to figure out how to break the news to him, I got a call from my doctor. And I had gotten my blood work back and sonogram results, and they said I needed to come back to the office right away. The pregnancy was ectopic, and I had to terminate it fewer than 48 hours after I found out. Having been pro-choice since college and writing a book about the history of the abortion issue in the U.S. and acting as a patient advocate since the late 1990s, I thought I would be fine. I really thought, I knew I would be sad, I knew I would feel grief. But I figured because I knew I was doing the right thing for my health, and because I knew that there really wasn't any other choice in the matter, I probably wouldn't go through all the kind of like stigma and shame that I see our patients go through, because I talk to people on a daily basis about this particular issue. And I was wrong about that. Even though it was a medical decision for me, I still feel a lot of guilt and shame about it, and I don't talk about it, even to my close family and friends, very much. So when this opportunity came up, I was like, oh, well, obviously this is probably the right time to discuss it. One of the things that's happened since then is I've become acutely aware of the conflict we have over healthcare and the politics around abortion specifically, and how the restrictions in terms of getting safe, legal and non-judgmental healthcare in our country is getting harder and harder. At ParkMed in New York, we're really, really lucky because we have award-winning board-certified OBGYN surgeons providing services and doing, second trimester abortions here in New York. But what's happening is that it's getting harder and harder around the country for people to get services. And so we're getting more and more calls from women who are coming from, hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away to New York because either they don't have a provider in their area, or they do have a provider in their area, but by the time they've scraped the funds together to get their abortion, or they've gotten through all of the thinking that they've had to do to make the decision because of how they're feeling about it, they're too far to be seen in their area. And so, it's heartbreaking on a daily basis to talk to people and, face women and girls calling and saying how like guilty and alone and ashamed they feel when it's like, literally, we see hundreds of people a week going through this very situation. And so it makes me sad that we're still having this conversation about feeling guilty and ashamed about medical decisions. These are medical health decisions. And we're talking about women and girls who are faced with trying to make the best decisions for their futures, for their families, for people faced with sexual assault. And, that's hard. It's also been really hard, especially with the last election, because of the personhood amendments that were on the ballots this year in North Dakota and Colorado. Luckily, they didn't pass. But that would have given a cluster of cells dividing, as part of my body, the same civil rights and protections, if not more, than I have as a person. And that's really scary if I was to become pregnant again, to be faced with that possibility. Now, they didn't pass, but even like the mildest form of it that passed in Tennessee is scary because it says very specifically, abortion is not a protected right in the state. And to write that into the Constitution, like, how does that make you feel? It just makes the stigma even harder to deal with. And so that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately in talking to people. And what I guess I really wanted to say to everybody out there is that you really shouldn't feel alone. And even if you do feel alone, factually, we know even before Roe v. Wade, there was 1 in 3 women, having abortions, and it's still the case. And so chances are you're not the only person that you know. And if you feel like you're the only person you know, there are people you can call. If you have to, call New York, we're here. If you need to, there's the national hotline for the National Abortion Federation. There's the backline counseling. Also, if you want to do something to help, I know people have talked about this before, but I work really closely with the National Network of Abortion Funds and especially the New York Abortion Access Fund. If you want to help donate, try to get in contact, volunteer. Like that, those are things that you can actively do to try to end the shame and the stigma attached to abortion. I think that's really important. And so that's sort of what I wanted to say as part of this today. And I was really excited that we could be a part of this first national Speakout. That's my thing.
Thank you for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma.
I think Heather brought up some really important points that are worth just highlighting. Is that the clinic that Heather is working at is working on second trimester abortions, and with clinics closing, with doctors under attack, it's harder and harder for women to find clinics that they can go to, and frequently, like she said, she's getting calls from across the country for her clinic. And so when we're talking about abortion care, yes, it's first trimester, but we also have to ensure that women who are in their second trimester have access to abortion care as well.
Yes, I completely agree. She hit on really important points and stuff that I think our viewers can really benefit from. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. You know, another thing that she talked about too was the defeat of some really awful ballot initiatives. And I know that's something that Color was super involved in. And would love to hear a little bit more about some of your work on the personhood measure.
Yeah, well, it was really scary because up until like, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before the elections, before ballots were due, it was only, I think it was like a 3%, there was 3% more on voting no on 67, only 3%. And so that was really terrifying. But Color, I didn't personally canvass at all, but I was involved in a lot of just like educational stuff. But Color canvassed so hard and actually hired like a lot of paid canvassing positions, and Color was pivotal in the work to defeat 67, and it makes me really proud because it was really scary. It was really close.
Well, and I think that's something that I've heard quite frequently from those who are in Colorado is a lot of the folks who are leading the fight against the personhood measure were young people. It was groups like Color and others. It was young people who were canvassing to really make sure that this awful measure was defeated.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely led by young people. Oh,
yeah. Well, actually, it looks like our next Skype guest is Tony. Tony, start whenever you are ready.
Hi, I'm ready. My name is Tony Van Pelt. I'm 67 years old. I had my abortion in 1969 when it was illegal. I have to say, when I found out that I was pregnant, I didn't have a second thought. I was sure that I was going to have an abortion. And in those days, because it was illegal, it was known in Cleveland, which is where I was at the time, Cleveland, Ohio, that you could go to a club and ask around and you could get a phone number. Which is what I did. And I called and I made an appointment, and I went to the east side of town to a neighborhood I had not been to before. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I found out it was going to cost $400, and I was 19 at the time, and I didn't have $400. And at that time, women did not have access to credit. It took me a while to find the money, and oddly enough, I got a bank loan, and which was kind of an unusual thing, but I had gone to work for Sears in their cafeteria, and they had issued me a credit card as an employee. So I got the $400, I made the arrangements, I drove myself to the other side of town. I didn't discuss it with a man that I had gotten pregnant with because, frankly, he was rather irresponsible and on his way to Woodstock, and it just wasn't a possibility that we would want to get together. So I drove to the east side, and a woman met me at the door in a nursing uniform. I think I was at her home, and she took me upstairs and laid me down, and she inserted a tube into my cervix. And I got in my car and I started to drive, and I was driving home, and it was about 11 p.m. and that shift was just over with, and I was in a factory district, and a man ran a red light and broadsided my car. And I ended up in the street, and the car ended up wrapped around a telephone pole. And my main concern was that I would be arrested because I had just had this abortion procedure. So the police came and an ambulance came, and I refused to go to the hospital because even though I felt like I needed to go to the hospital, that I had been injured, I was more concerned about being arrested. So finally, eventually, I made my way home. And the next day, the tube fell out, and so the abortion was not completed. I did then end up going to the hospital because I thought that, I wouldn't be arrested. I ended up in the hospital and out of work for a month. However, in that time period, I called back and I went to another place. And all I can remember is that I was put in a bathtub, and there were 2 women there, and I was in a basement apartment, and they were heating water on the stove and pouring hot water in this bathtub. Now, I don't know how that would cause an abortion. This is just my memory. So I went home, and the next night I did abort. It was fairly painless. It was like pieces of tissue and some blood. I aborted right into the toilet. And frankly, the only feeling I had was one of relief. And back at that time, there was no such thing as the people in authority and people with religious backgrounds that were trying to cause women guilt for doing what was best for themselves and for seeking health care and having to do it in a back alley. I found out later on from my mom that my aunt had never had a child, and she had had a back alley abortion, and my mom was with her, and she was pretty much butchered at that time. It wasn't a good thing. And I had another aunt who died. We were originally told that we were young. I was only 11 at the time, that she had eaten ice cubes and she had died from that. And then we were told that she died because she was in the hospital and she had to have a transfusion, and they gave her the wrong blood. At that time, the Cleveland Press was running pictures of women in hospital. Rows and rows of women in hospital wards that were there because of the abortion that they had suffered that had gone wrong. Anyway, about a month after my abortion, I got a phone call from a young woman, and she sounded very conflicted on the phone. So I invited her to my apartment. She wanted the phone number. And I talked to her for a while. She was a bit younger than I was, and I gave her the phone number. And a short time after that, I worked at Northwest Orient Airlines, and my birth name is Darlene Mazo. And I got a tap on the shoulder. I was at work. I worked at the Cleveland Airport in the hangar. That's where the reservation center was. And my supervisor was telling me that the police were there for me. So he escorted us to a room on the premises, and there were two police officers, and they told me that they knew I had been involved in an abortion, and that they would not arrest me, even though it was illegal, if I would give them information on the abortionist. And I have to say, I was still ill from the car accident, and but two things kicked in for me, and I think one of them was I was watching Perry Mason on TV, and so I knew I had rights, legal rights, and that was empowering for me. And then secondly, I had been reading Ann Landers, the advice columnist, since I had been quite young. I read her every single day, and I think that somehow she empowered me. And I became just angry and rebellious, and I was not going to help them. And I knew that what they were doing was wrong. I knew it was wrong that women could not access abortion care. So I refused to help them. They came back a couple of weeks later, and again, they came to the place where I worked, and I had found out in the meantime that the way they had found me is that the young woman had, all she would tell them, she ended up in the hospital after her abortion, and she was scared, and so she told them that all she could remember, she thought my name was Marlene Rizzo, and I worked at an airport, or for an airline. And so the way the police found me is they just started to call around, and my night supervisor informed them that they had a Darlene Mazo there. I'm happy to say that my the manager, Jim Clausen, at the time fired that supervisor for giving that information out because it was the wrong thing to do. But they did come back to my workplace a couple weeks later, and we went round and round again. And the third time they came out with an arrest warrant. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and they took me from my place of work. It was snowing out, and they wouldn't give me time to get my purse or my my coat. They put me in the back of a police car. And they essentially drove me around all night, and they took me from spot to spot. I really didn't know what was going on. I do know I was being arrested for aiding and abetting an illegal abortion because I had given out this phone number. And I ended up in the morning downtown at the Cuyahoga County Jail, which was an unpleasant place to be, and in a cell. I did give them a very hard time because I was angry that this was happening, and I wouldn't give them my name. They didn't present me with an arrest warrant, and so I didn't realize at the time that they didn't have my name properly on this arrest warrant. When they tried to take my photo, my hair was long and straight as it is right now, but I didn't have bangs. So every time the guy would go behind the camera, I would just put my head forward and all my hair would fall in front of my face, and only the tip of my nose would show. So then they tried to take my fingerprints, but I was really difficult about that. And I found that the reason that they were doing this is they thought that they would keep me in jail over the Thanksgiving holiday and that I would not be able to get out on bail until the earliest on Monday. And then I would give them the information they wanted. But I was able to make contact with my parents, and they got a judge from the old neighborhood who agreed to come in on Thanksgiving morning to hold a bail hearing for me. And I did get out on bail. It was a few months later that I had to go to court, and the judge essentially, actually his words were he aborted the case because they never had my name properly on the arrest warrant. And he said that he would have my arrest expunged from my record, and a few months later I had to go through a legal procedure, and it was expunged. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Tony, for sharing your story. And I think, Tony's story highlights, Tony's story is why we're here today. We are trying to talk about, create space for people to share their stories before Roe, create space for people to share their stories today. And I think it's an important lesson for us to hear what it was like before Roe, because we could very well go back and certainly do not want that to happen. So, Graciela, it looks like we have an in-studio guest today.
Yes, I'm happy to welcome Alex, who's joining us, who's going to share her story. Alex, tell us your story.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me here today. My name is Alex, and I had an abortion about 1 year ago. I got pregnant by accident. I was using birth control, but I wasn't using the most effective form of birth control. And that birth control method failed, and I ended up getting pregnant. I was in a long-term committed relationship, and at the time, there was no question in my mind that I would go through with the pregnancy. And I quickly realized that that maybe wasn't the best decision. When I actually got pregnant, my relationship was in a bad place, and my partner in particular was going through his own personal journey, and we just weren't ready. Our relationship wasn't ready, and our families weren't ready. And even though I felt a very deep emotional connection to the fetus inside me, which I had never anticipated, being somebody who was pro-choice, throughout my life, I hadn't anticipated that feeling. I decided to terminate the pregnancy. The actual termination of the pregnancy was really very simple. However, the process to get there was very complicated. I had to make an appointment with my doctor to figure out how far along I was. I have always had a regular period, so I had missed 4 months of my period leading up to the abortion, so I had no idea at what point in time I had gotten pregnant. The people at my doctor's office, they really resisted getting me in there. I wanted to get in right away and find out how far along I was, and they were insistent that I didn't need to get in there. And they congratulated me at every moment and every turn every time I announced that I was pregnant, which just struck me as incredibly unprofessional. Eventually I did get in there. The doctor was very professional and very understanding, and they recommended a very specific clinic in Baltimore, and they said, this is the one to go to, don't go to any others. I had a good experience at the clinic. The clinic was very run down, but there's like paint chipping off the walls, and I'm pretty sure the posters that were on the walls had been there since Roe versus Wade, the decision came down. But everybody was very nice. The procedure went off without a hitch. I felt very relieved immediately following the termination of the pregnancy, which I didn't expect because I had struggled so hard to make the choice. But the second I walked out of the exam room, I just felt this weight lifted off me. I really, for the first time in the weeks leading up to that, where I kind of went through the process, I finally felt like I was at peace. And I knew that in that moment that I had made the right decision. I'm here today because I think that the 1 in 3 campaign is incredibly important. It's something that's helped me when I was going through my decision to terminate, and when I was in the throes, and even afterwards, even now, when I'm feeling any sadness or anything like that, sometimes I will thumb through the stories of other women, actually, and particularly the ones that resonate with me are the ones of women who are older and had their abortions years ago and now have families, and they know that what they did looking back now is the right choice. And I think that I'm still going through part of my process, but I know that it was part of my journey to terminate that pregnancy, and that looking back on it, I will have no regrets and I will get there too.
Well, we're honored that you shared your story here today with us. I think that it's a really important story to share, and I like that you said that the 1 in 3 campaign, it helps you even today, like just to thumb through the stories and the ones that you feel resonate with you most. And I think it's a really incredible reminder that the work that we're doing is important, and that it very directly impacts a lot of people.
And how did you find out about the campaign?
I was always very involved in women's issues, in particular, like sexual assault and things like that. And I came across it, I think, just on Facebook, and I followed it and found it, and I was just inspired. And this was before I had my own personal journey. But I was really inspired by it, and I continued to follow it. And then when I was in my own situation, I knew exactly where to turn. And ultimately, the 1 in 3 campaign and the stories there inspired me to seek out advocates for youth, and that's where I have an internship at now, and that's how I got involved. And it's almost like everything came full circle.
Sure did. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thanks again for being with us today. Sarah, who's our next guest?
Graciela, I think we have another Skype caller right now.
Oh, yes, Sarah. Katie will be joining us now to share her story. Katie, start whenever you're ready.
Hi, thanks for having me. My decision wasn't difficult, and I have never for 1 minute felt anything but relief and gratitude from my doctor, the Planned Parenthood. I was so lucky to have literally down the block, and the mostly supportive people in my life. That doesn't mean the process of accessing an abortion was easy, or that I ever want to go through the waiting, the scheduling, the getting time off work, the loss of a best friend, and the being pregnant. Being pregnant when I didn't want to be felt like having my body invaded against my will. And when I share my story, it's remembering that feeling, which is a feeling I share with so many who have needed abortions for whatever reason, that keeps me boldly outspoken. My story is pretty ordinary, and it's often the ordinary stories that break down stigma. I'd lost 3 jobs in less than a year on the heels of the 2008 slowdown, recession, whatever experts are calling it these days. And I'd paid out of pocket for my health insurance my entire adult life, so 10 years. and I had a prescription plan that I paid for. But pre-Affordable Care Act, my insurance company was legally able to deny coverage of the name brand birth control that was best able to treat all of my needs, both the contraception, the migraines. The generic form of the pill had stopped working to control my migraines about 2 years earlier. This meant my birth control was $80 a month. And let me tell you, I have been food insecure for more of my adult life than I haven't been, and I can grocery shop on way less than $80 a month. So I stopped refilling my prescription, choosing food over birth control, as so many in our country have had to do in their lives. My only partner at the time was an ex I'd continued to see off and on, so a person I had history with. We'd dated for 4 years and been involved for 6. And this part of my story I've actually never told publicly because of stigma. I didn't want people to miss the point because of the sex, which can distract some from the core message of access. But if we're going to stop categorizing abortions as good, bad, okay, not okay, more permissible, less awful, etc., to change this country for my nieces, who you may hear in the background, your children, the coming generation, we have to tell our real, unedited truths. And so that means that condoms hadn't been part of our routine for years. I'd been on birth control the entirety of our history, and once we became exclusive, we did what a lot of couples do, and we ditched the secondary protection. He had no reason to ask or know, 6 years in, whether I was still on birth control. Of course, he assumed I was. And in the moment, because it was him, because of our history, because of routine, grabbing a condom out of the nightstand just didn't occur to me until the next day. I knew almost immediately that I was pregnant. I had to wait for the home pregnancy test to be accurate, which takes about 3 weeks. The whole time hoping I was wrong, working 60 hours a week at 2 physical service industry jobs, an experience I would not wish on anyone. And not just because I never want kids. I was already exhausted. Like so many people who seek abortion care, we're exhausted. We're exhausted from the children we already have. We're exhausted from the jobs we have to work. We're exhausted. There was no room in my life for a pregnancy, let alone a child. I was lucky. I had 2 female managers at the time, one of whom I was super tight with and knew like every detail of what was going on. A coworker there had already offered to cover my shifts. And since I never took time off at my second job, I worked almost 7 days a week there, a couple of days for a medical procedure was a pretty easy ask. But it was really expensive. Even though Planned Parenthood was amazing and the procedure there only cost about $400, 3 unpaid days off of 2 jobs put the total around $1,000 for me. And I didn't have travel, waiting periods, ultrasounds to endure like so many people do these days. I also didn't have to walk through picketers at my Planned Parenthood, a reality I actually wouldn't learn still existed now until my local NARAL affiliate reached out for looking for clinic defense escorts about a year later. I say that Planned Parenthood saved my life with all the weight that that implies. It has been almost 5 years, and I have been able to build a life. I am a full-time caregiver to my 2 beautiful nieces, a full-time reproductive healthcare advocate, and I'm becoming a healthy, happy person because of the decision I made and the access I had. And it breaks my heart to think that that kind of access and care isn't available to everyone. These are things that my best friend at the time of my unplanned pregnancy didn't consider, just like most anti-choice people don't. She called me the night before the procedure and offered to adopt the baby, she and her husband. I asked her, was she going to fly me from Chicago to Phoenix, get me out of my lease, pay my medical bills, pay my other bills, and then find me 2 jobs to replace the ones I would lose after leaving for several months. And there was silence. We can't know someone else's circumstances, and that's why abortion should be safe, legal, and available to anyone who needs it. We can get to that place by telling our stories today and every day. So thank you so much to Advocates for Youth and the 1 in 3 campaign.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma.
Yeah, you know, I think something that Katie brings up that is so important that we don't talk about enough in this movement is that abortion access is an economic issue. Katie was talking about working for having 2 jobs and not being able to afford her contraception when it was no longer covered. And at the end of the day, these are pocketbook issues, right? Is that this is about making sure that women have the access that they need, that they have jobs with good health insurance that can cover abortion care. These are all things that we have to consider, especially as we're seeing clinics close, especially as we know abortion is an expensive procedure, and especially as we know we don't have enough states that have Medicaid covering abortion care.
Yes, I agree. It's such a dynamic issue. There's so many different parts to it, and I think that a lot of anti-choice rhetoric doesn't consider that and doesn't view it as an issue with many different branches from all different systems of oppression. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it's really exciting to hear from Katie, who is talking about a story from years ago to where she is now, because there are a lot of women out there that we know they want to have kids later. And what we're hearing over and over again is it wasn't the right time. Is that contraception didn't work, something happened, and it wasn't the right time for them to have a child yet. And those are decisions that are responsible decisions. They're decisions that we should respect as a community, and I think that's one of the reasons why this space is so incredibly important, so that people can share their stories about, you know, why they made the decisions they made and to create space for others to do the same. So right now, we are thrilled to be joined via Skype by Ilyse Waldman, best-selling author, including most recently the novel Love and Treasure. Ilyse is a fearless essayist who has shared her abortion story in the collection Bad Mother. And she is sharing with us today. Ilyse, start whenever you are ready, please.
Hi, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you guys for letting me appear via Skype. I'm, you know, on this crazy book tour, so it's just great to be here with you guys. I'm so grateful to you for doing this.
Wonderful. Please go ahead and share your story.
So I'm actually not going to talk about the abortion that I experienced, that I wrote about in my book, because that was a second trimester abortion due to a genetic abnormality, and that's a really easy case. What I'm going to talk about is the 2 other abortions I had, the ones that I don't regret for a second, the ones that I would be vilified for having had an abortion of convenience by those who don't agree with my choice. But these other 2 abortions that I had are much more common to other women's experience, and it's much more relevant to the 1 in 3 discussion. So when I had my daughter when I was 29, my eldest, she's 20 years old now, and when she was 5 months old, I got accidentally pregnant. I was using birth control, I was breastfeeding full time. I started work on a Monday. Right, I was going back to work after having been on maternity leave. I started work on a Monday, threw up that morning. On a Wednesday, I had a pregnancy test. On a Friday, I had a very, very early first trimester abortion. I won't say that it was not hard. There was definitely hard. I was sad, but I had absolutely no regrets. I knew that this was something that I needed to do for the sake of my daughter, for the sake of me, for the sake of my job, and for the sake of my family. I made a similar decision a couple of years ago. I'm turning 50, and when I was 47, I again got accidentally pregnant, this time also using birth control, and I had 4 children at the time. Given where my family was, our situation, the age of my kids, and given the chances of having it at age 47, a baby with a genetic abnormality, I made a decision to terminate that pregnancy. And again, I didn't experience any regret at all, not a moment of it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma. I wanted to ask, what made you decide to start sharing your story?
Well, I've always been pro-choice. I've always felt that the strongest tool women have is the voice of our experience. And but what inspired me to share the story specifically was a kind of feeling that I see in the zeitgeist that starts from a good place. It starts from the place of the idea that abortions should be rare and readily available, so that, you know, if there's a failure of birth control, if there's another reason that an abortion needs to happen, that we should regret that, but, you know, provide that abortion. And I do agree with that point of view. However, there is this kind of implication that can result from that there's something to be ashamed of, that there's, you know, that you should have regrets, that it's the only ethical thing to do is to say, I had an abortion and I'm sorry, but, you know, these were my reasons. And I felt in a way that I was participating in that narrative by talking about this very, very painful abortion that my husband and I had when it was a second trimester abortion. The baby had a genetic abnormality. And around that experience, I met a lot of women who wouldn't call what they did an abortion. They called it a heartbreaking choice. And I found that really reprehensible, because that is an abortion. When you terminate a pregnancy because of a genetic abnormality, you're having an abortion. And only by saying this is an abortion and accepting that the term and the responsibility that comes along with it, do we guarantee the right continues for other people. And I realized when I was, you know, involved in that world and involved in that experience, that I had to acknowledge also that what happened with me and the other abortion that I had before that, and then the one I went on to have since, was, you know, that I needed to accept not just the responsibility, but also, I'm sorry, I'm walking to get my food because we are on Skype and I'm just ordered room service, but that I needed to, you know, I needed to say that abortion doesn't need to be something you regret. Hi, come on in. I'm on a Skype call. If you'll just put it down for me, I'd be really appreciative. That it needs to be, that sometimes the only emotion you experience, often the only emotion you experience, is profound relief. And that's what I experienced twice.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
And right now, we have Melissa, who is joining us on set to share her story. Thank you so much for coming to the studio, Melissa, and start whenever you're ready.
Absolutely, welcome for coming. So I was 23 when I became pregnant, and was surprised. I was young and found out the hard way that contraception doesn't always work. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that I wasn't ready to have a child. I knew I wasn't ready to have a child emotionally or financially, but I still didn't know what to do. I went to Planned Parenthood and saw one of their counselors, and they were amazing. They really sat down with me and helped me figure out all my feelings, how I felt about abortion, how I felt about possibly adoption, how I felt about possibly having a child, even though I didn't feel that I was ready. So they were, I can't say enough that they were amazing. One thing today that irritates me is when people talk about how bad Planned Parenthood is and that they are just provide abortions and encourage abortions, which is so not the case. I walked away from there with brochures about adoption agencies. I walked away with information about abortion, should I choose that. I walked away with information where to go if I was wanting to find information about, assistance for young single people. In the end, I obviously chose to have an abortion, and it was absolutely the perfect choice for me at the time. It's what I had to do. I truly thought about adoption a lot, but I realized I was not ready emotionally to be able to carry a pregnancy to term and then give it up for adoption. So for me, I chose that the right thing was to have an abortion. With that, I ended up going to a private facility. This was in, I think it was 1993, I guess, when I had it, and kind of, well, not near the beginning of a lot of anti-abortion stuff, but a lot of protests here and there. So I didn't want to go to the Planned Parenthood because I did not want to be. I didn't want to put myself in that situation. So I feel very fortunate that there was still a time period that you could go to a private facility and have a private GYN perform it. because today it's not very common, which I think is quite disgusting, honestly. So I did that. I went to the facility. I was treated with respect and dignity, which everyone should be treated with respect and dignity no matter what medical procedure you go in for. One of the things that I remember, which is, to me, just kind of wrapped everything up kind of perfectly for me, because I was a little uneasy because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this, and they asked me if I wanted to listen to music, and they had videos I could watch. So, so I was like, oh, sure, okay. And I chose Billy Joel in concert. It was 93. And as I'm having my procedure, the song that he's singing and performing is My Life. And it just like seemed perfect. I'm like, yeah, this is my life. Leave me alone. It's my decision, my choice, and this is what I've decided to do. And that just always really stuck with me. Afterwards, I was sad for a while. I wasn't regretful ever, and I still never have been regretful. But I guess I kind of felt some of that. What I think is the societal shame, and so for a while there was, it took me a while to process things and get through things. But eventually, and I don't know what the eventually was, I don't know if it was a couple of years or, I mean, I knew I was absolutely fine and that I made the right decision. I was sad, I was never depressed. And I was relieved. I was grateful that I had access to, safe care. My mom and her generation grew up before Roe. So, I had heard stories and couldn't fathom something like that. And really, in today's climate, it does scare me that there is so much, just so many people working to place restrictions on care. Because not only does it it hurts women and will make things dangerous, but quite honestly, it's horribly insulting to think, that people think that women cannot make an informed decision on their own. So that's kind of why I'm here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and helping end the stigma. I was wondering what made you want to start sharing your story?
So I'm not sure when I finally started to let other people know that I had had an abortion. Probably within a few years after I had it, then I started to meet other people my age that we shared with each other, and it was kind of like this, this sisterhood, like, oh my gosh, you're not alone, and type of thing. And a handful of years ago, I just kind of decided it doesn't have to be only a small group of people. So really, it's like I've decided that we really need to change the idea that abortion is a dirty word, and that it's this horrible thing that happens, because it's not. And really, it's a common experience that a lot of women share for a multitude of different reasons. Society tells us don't talk about it, or you should be ashamed. And that angers me, because no woman should ever be ashamed for making a decision based on what's right for her. And just really, it's just my belief that we really need to stop living by society's dogma and live our own truth. So that's why.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Melissa.
Now I'd like to take a moment to describe the work that's being done by Graciela. So for the last 2 years, young people like Graciela have been shattering the silence around abortion, and we will talk about some of them today. So we definitely want to take a minute to shout out to all the campuses across the country that are holding 1 in 3 watch parties for today's Speak Out. There are 1 in 3 activists in Maine, Montana, Arkansas, Texas, California, 2 of my favorite states, and other places across the country, and are holding Speak Outs themselves, sharing stories and shattering the silence. So thank you so much for that. Graciela, you're doing amazing work in Colorado. Thanks for agreeing to talk with us more about it. So can you want to share with folks what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I'm doing work through COLOR, which is the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. And if you'd like to support my work and that of many other campus groups, please consider donating to the 1 in 3 campaign by visiting www.1in3campaign.org.
Awesome. And so what are some of the things that you have been doing in Colorado with 1 in 3?
So through Color, I've accessed a lot of resources, and obviously through Advocates for Youth, gotten trained on how to be a campus lead for the 1 in 3 campaign, and I attend Regis University, which is a Jesuit Catholic university in Metro Denver, and so it's been really challenging. It's been really hard to do any type of large action or work on campus, just because it's a Catholic and it's a Jesuit institution, and actually the Archdiocese of Denver is fairly conservative, so that makes things really challenging. And I was actually really scared to bring the work to Regis campus. I knew that I wanted to do this work, and I knew that I wanted to volunteer with the 1 in 3 campaign, but it was terrifying. I had questions of, could I lose my scholarship? Could I be kicked out of school? Like, I had a really rough beginning at Regis, and so I was like, people already don't like me on this campus. I already feel too radical for this campus. I was terrified, and so the biggest action that I've done at Regis, and it's a baby step, and I'm still proud of it though, and I think it's still important. I ended up having what we call at Color cafecitos, which is a more intimate, small gathering of friends where you can talk, have food, share drinks, and just kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about. And this cafecito's focus was the 1 in 3 campaign, and just what choice and what abortion looks like at Regis and on our campus. And so it was intimate, and it was effective. At Color, we think that cafecitos are one of the most effective ways to reach out to our community and to bring the community voice to the issue that we're working on. And so we had a fall, autumn-themed cafecito at my mom's house off campus. And I invited the student body president, some people from Student Senate that I know support the issue. And it was only for allies and only for people who support a woman's choice and who support abortion access, because I wanted it to be a safe space. Things like abortion speakouts on campus would not be a safe and secure thing to do, and I didn't want to put anyone's safety at risk, anyone's financial aid, scholarships at risk. So this was the baby step that I've taken, and it's grown to larger conversations. And I think our next event, or the next event that I'd like to do with the 1 in 3 campaign, is bring this conversation to the Women's and Gender Studies book club. I'm a Women's and Gender Studies major, and I know a lot of people are in that book club that are pretty informed on women's rights issues, but not all of them are all the way to the point where they would say, I support abortion and I support access to abortion. And so I think that's the next baby step that Regis can take and that I can take as a campus lead at Regis.
It's really exciting to hear that you're doing all this work as a graduate of a Jesuit university, of Georgetown University.
Oh, okay.
You know, these are something, an issue that we faced, my peers faced when we were on campus with the fantastic student group Hoyas for Choice, and something that Hoyas for Choice members still continue to battle with today. But something you should know, and others who are watching should know, there are a lot of us Catholic college alums who absolutely stand up for abortion access, who absolutely support people sharing their stories. I mean, we're taught to be men and women for others at our Jesuit universities. The 1 in 3 campaign is one way that we can be men and women for others as we support people who are sharing their stories, and as we support those who are making the decision to have an abortion. So thank you for sharing about your great work. And now we have a pre-recorded message from Congresswoman Barbara Lee of Oakland, California. Everyone should check her out immediately if you don't know who she is yet. She's a fantastic supporter of reproductive justice and the right to safe abortion care.
Hello, everyone. I am Congresswoman Barbara Lee and represent California's 13th District. I am so honored to participate in Advocates for Youth's first ever live stream abortion Speakout for the 1 in 3 campaign. During this Speakout, people from all across the United States will be sharing their abortion stories, and I applaud each and every one of you for your bravery. And it takes incredible courage to share such a personal story. I have long advocated for a woman's right to choose and the right to have a safe and healthy alternative, a right that has been upheld and guaranteed by the Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade. Statistics show that women in their 20s accounted for the majority of abortions. 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime. Yet women continue to be shamed and face stigma for practicing their fundamental right to choose. That is why the 1 in 3 campaign is so important, and we cannot allow efforts to stigmatize and restrict a woman's right to choose. I am proud to stand beside you and be witness to your commitment to fighting for important programs that protect the reproductive rights of every woman. As one of the nation's premier reproductive justice organizations dedicated to advancing health, dignity, and justice for young people, especially young women and their families and communities in the United States, Advocates for Youth are truly making a difference. There are so many women, particularly young women and women of color, whose lives have been positively affected by your work, and I commend you on the work you have done. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this important campaign.
Those are some fantastic words from Congresswoman Barbara Lee from Oakland. Should also note that there's great organizations in Oakland, a great abortion fund, Access, that people should also check out and support women of color leading the fight in her district. Graciela, can you introduce our next guest?
Yes, Jacqueline will be joining us by Skype. Jacqueline, start whenever you're ready.
Okay. So my story starts here. I grew up in little bubble, not really aware of the events taking place in other parts of the world, somewhat ignorant to the day-to-day hardships life can have. I had this strong faith in God, and with my religious beliefs came a really strong view on abortion as well. And then I left my little bubble, and throughout college I was exposed to the real world and the injustices that people face. I began to see that there are innate human rights that aren't always upheld, and one thing became pretty apparent to me, that when it comes to pregnancy, people should have the right to choose if and when they are ready to have children. But though I became a strong supporter of other women making that decision to have an abortion, I never thought I'd actually have to make that choice. So it was the end of my senior year in college, just days before my graduation. I kind of had my study schedule and everything planned out, and as the first one to graduate from college, my parents and my grandparents were going to be so proud. But something just didn't feel right. My body began to feel different, like I was going to start my period, but then it never came. And I think that in my heart, I knew what was going on, but I was really in denial. My mind was just started racing. I had been on birth control, so I thought maybe I'd missed a pill or two. And a few weeks prior, I was taking antibiotics, so I thought I wasn't sure, could that have been it? So I ended up at the doctor's office, still very much in denial, not expecting what I'd heard next. When she told me that I was pregnant, I just began to cry. I remember it feeling like a really bad dream, and maybe if I just kept crying, I'd just wake up. But I didn't stop crying for a good 30 minutes. And Veronica, I remember her name, she was the medical assistant that was helping me. She just kept coming back into the room to see if I was ready to talk. And I felt so horrible that I was making her wait for so long. But then her empathy helped console me as she went through my different options. And it was a really long visit. By the end, I told her that I thought I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't really sure yet. One thing that I took from this is that you really think you know how you feel about abortion, but it's such a different feeling when it's a decision that you're actually having to make. I remember my emotions just sort of pulling at me. How could I let this happen? I'm a good student. I'm a good person. I still have so many things to accomplish. But then I'm graduating from college, and that means I should be responsible and I should find a way to support a child. And then I started thinking, but do I really want to raise a child with this person? Is this the man that I want to be the father of one of my children? Are you truly ready for this? You know, your parents will be so disappointed in you. My mind just kind of kept going back and forth. A few days later, I told my boyfriend, and he seemed supportive, telling me that he sees how hard it has been for his sister to raise a child at a young age, and that we're not really ready, but ultimately it's my body and my decision, so he will support me either way. 2 days later, he ended up breaking up with me, and I was devastated. I felt so close to success, and suddenly it just seemed like everything was falling apart. My family then flew in because I went to college away from home, and I just kind of had to put a smile on and pretend that I was happy and proud of all the things that I had accomplished over the past 4 years, when in reality I had sort of just accomplished the one thing that I felt would truly break my father's heart. I remember crying with my mother because I was heartbroken, but even more so because I was pregnant and I had to make an extremely hard decision on my own, and I couldn't even share that with her. Graduation just kind of came and then it went. My boyfriend ended up coming back, and I guess, as you can see, this wasn't the healthiest of relationships. He was a little insecure and sometimes couldn't control his temper, sometimes violent when he drank. So I ended up going through with the surgical procedure at about 6 or 7 weeks. It was very early on. And I know that everyone's experience is different, but I had very little pain and just a little bit of cramping and very light spotting that evening. The staff was probably the most empathetic, comforting group of people that I had ever encountered. Physically, I felt fine the next day, and mentally and emotionally in a much better place, like myself again. That relationship, eventually it ended, and though I'm not really proud of it, I'm grateful that I experienced all that I did. I do wish the stigma against these procedures didn't exist, because I wish my mother could have supported me during that time. I tried to talk to her about it not too long ago, but she didn't really want to listen. Thankfully, I have supportive friends in a community that understands and empathizes. I do want all women and girls to know that the thoughts and feelings that you experience are normal, that there are people that can support you to make whatever decision is best for you, whether that's pregnancy or adoption or abortion. Sometimes I think we forget about the lives that are taken by unsafe abortions and the millions of lives that are affected by unplanned pregnancies. And I know that God is loving and forgiving and only wants what's best for us, that he values our lives as people too. Having an abortion was not an easy decision in any way, but I haven't once regretted it. I do think I'm a better, stronger person for having gone through this. I know that this was the best decision for me at that time in my life. And I just think that nobody knows you better than yourself, your thoughts and your feelings, and nobody else can know what's best for you. I think it's so important for us to remember this, and we shouldn't let anybody try to tell us otherwise. So.
Thank you for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma. I was wondering, what made you want to start sharing your story, Jacqueline?
I think that sharing my story is twofold. First, I want to share my story for the women and girls and people who experience an unplanned pregnancy, because I think it's a very frightening thing. And choosing to have an abortion isn't just a difficult decision, but there's such a huge stigma surrounding the procedures that we're made to feel even worse about ourselves, and we often don't have anyone to talk to. And I think that it's, like we're doing here, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion. So it's extremely prevalent. And I just want people to know that the feelings that they experience are shared by others. Just like with any type of surgery, we want to feel comforted and know that we'll be all right. But with this one, a lot of people and women are made to feel like they have to hide it. And sometimes just knowing one person who has gone through the same experience makes all the difference. And then the other reason that I have been wanting to share my story is for those who don't support a woman or a person's right to choose, because I think that they don't realize that these decisions affect our bodies and our lives. And I really wanted to share my story because I feel that it's very normal and typical. A lot of times, maybe terms like good abortions or bad abortions are thrown around, but we shouldn't be judged on them in any way. There shouldn't, I just don't feel that there should be laws that exist because you were raped or because a pregnancy will end in fetal demise, that your abortion is acceptable. I just don't think that I think nobody should have that power over another human being, because we know ourselves better than anyone and we know what's best for ourselves. And as women and people, society should trust that.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
I think there's a few things that when Jacqueline was sharing her story that really resonated with me. One is that, we keep coming back to one pregnancy decision is not more moral than the other, right? And so whatever a woman decides to do, it should be respected. I think the other thing that we've heard quite often is just the incredibly important role of providers. And so it makes me think about, the fantastic students with medical students for choice or nursing students for choice who are really educating themselves to be there for women who are deciding to terminate, to make sure that they have the skills both to perform procedures, but also to be there for women as they're making those important decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really glad that we've heard lots of stories today where women actually did have a good and supportive experience at these providers, and that's so important, because it's for many women, I think, have shared that it's often a really hard decision. It's a really hard procedure because of the societal pressure and stigma, and to be able to let go of that when you walk into a provider's office, I think that that's crucially important, and I'm really glad that we're hearing these stories.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of why, we need to make sure that more providers are being trained on how to provide abortions. This is why we need to make sure that we're supporting really innovative and great networks like abortion doulas. I know that there's some really great abortion doula programs in New York. I know that Washington, D.C., there's a network that's developing, and because it's important to be there and to be supporting women, when they're having the procedure, beforehand, after. I definitely hope this is something else that we can bring into the conversation, is how can we be more supportive of providers? How can we be more supportive of those who are having an abortion, both before, during, and after? Mm-hmm. So I think the other thing, and we'll go back to this a little bit, and I know we had Reverend Hafner on before, but just talking about, for those who are spiritual, for many people, this is a very spiritual decision for them, and that there are many churches out there that are supportive of women who decide to terminate a pregnancy.
Yeah, and it's just something that we don't talk about. It's something that I definitely lose sight of at a Jesuit Catholic university. I forget that there are people of faith there's definitely a lot of support for the anti-choice group on my campus, and I think that oftentimes I generalize and I'm like, this is the only thing that I see on a day-to-day basis every time I go to school. Everyone who is religiously affiliated feels this way, and it's so great to be a part of communities like this and projects like this, to be reminded that there are plenty of people of faith who think that women are people and who want to support women in every medical decision that they make.
And I think that's, one of the reasons why it's been so important to have organizations like National Council of Jewish Women, to have the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice there, and even at CAP, Center for American Progress, we have a program where we're specifically training faith leaders to get more engaged in reproductive justice, because so many of our faith leaders are here and they're with us, and we really just need to be, how can we create more space, more platforms for them to share their points of view about why these are just and moral and religious decisions that women are making, because too often we're hearing too much rhetoric from the other side when we know that there's plenty of church communities that are out there supporting women in these decisions.
I definitely agree, and I'm really glad that that Jacqueline was able to speak to that a bit, and just speak to how she remains a woman of faith, and she remains like her understanding, and how that understanding was molded through this experience that God loves women too, and that God values women as people. And I think, just far too often it's not a side of this issue and of this community that we see often enough.
Absolutely. I mean, I was, for example, just a couple months ago, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation had their annual legislative conference, which is a really great time if you've never been here in DC. And Planned Parenthood for the last few years has been doing a really great breakout section, because the CBC, actually all of their members for this term, have been really vocal in supporting a woman's right to access contraception, a woman's right to access abortion care. And there was a fantastic panel where Reverend Marcia Dyson was there and talking about the religious perspective in the Black church, and why that there are pastors that will speak up. And it was so wonderful, because I think for many of us, especially those who have grown up in a church, we're looking for those religious voices and those voices of faith. And I know that there's a lot of people that are involved with Planned Parenthood or CAP or other organizations who are providing that space.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So next, we're going to speak to Jacqueline Lawton via Skype. Jacqueline is a critically acclaimed DC playwright, dramaturg, and theater teaching artist. She is recognized as one of the top 30 African-American playwrights by Arena Stage's American Voices New Play Institute. And I'm excited to introduce her as the co-producer of the groundbreaking new play, Out of Silence, Abortion Stories from the 1 in 3 campaign. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
So if you could please share about what exactly have you been working on?
Well, with this play, what we did was we commissioned about 14 playwrights over the course of the summer to write plays in response to stories from the 1 in 3 campaign. So part of my work was to select the playwrights and then introduce them to Advocates for Youth, and specifically to the 1 in 3 campaign, and then to work with them on the stories that were shared. And it was great because so many of the playwrights feel very passionately about the issue of abortion rights and women's rights and healthcare rights for women specifically. So it was wonderful that so many playwrights just immediately said, yes, I'm available, I want to do this, I want to write a play. One of the hardest things was that the plays were only 4 minutes in length. And so, because we turned it into kind of a series of vignettes for 1 hour. And so it was, the playwrights got really inspired and really excited about the women and the characters and the stories and the message that it was sending, that they wanted to write more. So that was a challenge, but definitely a good challenge to have. And so over the summer we did, a lot of workshop development, and then we had the reading that took place at the Urban Retreat, which was so well received. It was such a positive and engaging experience, very compelling. And then since then, we've commissioned, I think, 4 more playwrights to write plays, and then I've also written a play. So it's just been really exciting.
And thank you so much. And so what has been some of the responses that you've received so far, and what do you anticipate as this hopefully grows and is heard across the country?
Well, the response has been, just huge gratitude and appreciation for telling these stories and for introducing these, very personal, deeply personal stories for a larger audience. because so often the conversation around abortion is simply policy and laws and one-sided arguments that don't get to the heart of challenging decisions that couples are making. And so what the play has really done is allowed for that opportunity to deepen the conversation and to let these women's stories be heard. It's just been really beautiful. And I'm really excited that the plays are now going to be read publicly in New York at Primary Stages. And then also we'll have the performance in January at Studio Theater in DC. So we'll even have a larger, more wider audience that will be able to experience the play, which is really fantastic.
That's so important. I think that's a really incredible project, and I'm really excited for it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think some of the things that we've been hearing today is what are the different ways that art can be brought into the conversation. Yeah. So from the video from Fabiana to Liz Winstead looking through comedy to we've had several authors who have been on here, and now for theater to have a role, that is fantastic. And I feel very privileged to be here in DC, so I can see it in January when it is here.
That's awesome.
Because that's what she just said.
That's so exciting. Sarah, have you completed your 2-hour shift on the Speakout?
I think I have. I know, it's been zooming by. I hope it's been zooming by for viewers too, because this has just been an incredible experience.
Yeah. So we're saying goodbye to Sarah now. Thanks for hosting, Sarah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Advocates for Youth, for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone who's been sharing their stories. I'm looking forward to following the conversation online.
And now I'm honored to introduce Dr. Willie Parker, an OBGYN abortion provider and reproductive justice advocate. Welcome, Dr. Parker.
Thanks for having me.
Go ahead. So as an OBGYN, you have chosen to help women in need of abortion care. Why are you so committed to being an abortion provider?
Well, OBGYN is my chosen medical specialty. And in the context of doing that work, I see myself as a reproductive health advocate and a human rights activist. And I see abortion as one aspect of reproductive health. The reality is when a woman's pregnant, the most essential decision that she has to make is if it's a desired pregnancy, how she will have a healthy one. And if it's an undesired pregnancy, how will she end that pregnancy safely? So there are many people who are willing to provide prenatal care and obstetrics, but when a woman needs the vital health care of abortion, there aren't many people to do that. In fact, 90% of women live in a county with no abortion provider. So I think that having access to abortion care is as important as receiving good prenatal care and good obstetrics. So it's my goal to make sure that a woman has everything she needs to realize her reproductive choices.
In the face of all the political rhetoric and hate mongering many providers face.
Sorry, I missed part of this.
Oh, it was just what makes you continue to provide services in the face of all the political rhetoric and hate mongering many providers are facing right now?
Well, absolutely. Abortion and reproductive rights are an issue, and that there are people who feel strongly about it to the point that they're willing to harm others. But I see that this work is necessary and it's vital work. And my goal is to make sure that when women make that decision, that there's someone there to provide those services. So even though there is some peril related to my decision to do the work, it's the same peril that women face as they try and live out their reproductive intentions. So I think I should simply choose to focus on the importance of the work that I do. And that makes it, for me, worthwhile. I take a common sense approach to the risks involved. So, but I think more about the women and what they need than about what might happen to me for providing the service.
Well, thank you so much for your work, Dr. Parker, and thank you for joining us today to end the stigma.
My pleasure.